Welcome into another episode of Behind the Glass Sports. I'm Aiden Dollins here with Will Miller, wishing all our best to those in the LA and Louisiana and southern Mississippi and all throughout the southeastern part of the country dealing with flooding and torrential rain and wind and all sorts of other unpleasantness right now. That's where Hardy Graham is. He's riding this one out down in the Mobile Bay, waiting for power and internet to come back, we presume. So we're going to talk about how to flood a badger hole, which is what the Tide will look to do when they roll into Camp Randall, Wisconsin on Saturday. Getting ready to take on the Wisconsin Badgers. Will, how are we feeling heading into this game?
Well, it's a road opener, marquee non-conference game against a Power Four, which we all know many conversations about needing more of those games. Well, now, asking you shall receive, and probably, you could argue is the most underrated environment in all of college football. But, more than that, a team that just plays, smash mouth football. And we got Luke Fickell as head coach, who Alabama is not unfamiliar with, having played him when he was at Cincinnati, albeit perhaps with lesser talent in the trenches than he has at his disposal at this point in time. A lot of people are going to be raising the red flags after last weekend's game between Alabama and South Florida. I'm not one of them. I don't see a lot out of this Wisconsin team. They've struggled in their, last two games against some comparatively paltry competition. So I'm not too high on the Badgers. I think Alabama will win, probably cover two.
All right. Do you want to start off? Do you want to rehash last week's game, or do you want to jump right into talking about the Badgers? I'm feeling a little keyed up about it because I just
go ahead, whatever you got. Lay it on.
All right. Well, let's get into it because you're right, Will. We have seen Alabama play a Luke Fickell team before at Cincinnati, and you would think that the talent level at his disposal at Wisconsin is perhaps better. I think Cincinnati's kind of unique as a group of five team, or Power Four team now, I guess. In the talent they had, but watching Wisconsin play South Dakota last week, Will, I have to wonder. In theory, yeah, but is that actually what's playing out in reality? I don't see a ton of speed on the back end of their defense at all. I don't really see a ton of speed in their linebacking core. And the other thing I really noticed that really surprised me for a Luke Fickell coach team, Will, was their really poor tackling defense. And I get the sense that I think Alabama fans can actually be a little excited to see some Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard action, kind of more like what we saw in week one than the dud that the first three quarters of Saturday night were.
I agree with that. I think from a defensive standpoint, Wisconsin, they seem like a shoe-in to hire Jim Leonhard as the coach, a couple of years ago or whenever it was. That didn't happen. I think they hired Luke Fickell, who's really good. Record speaks for itself. As for fit, I've always questioned it. I still do. And I think that you look at a game like USF, a team that just plays so much faster and so much of a different style of football, and that's what behooves them. That's what's up Alex Golesh's alley, and it's going to be up some Power Four teams' alley in the next 2 or 3 years, at the most. In my opinion, it could be next year.
Most.
So it's an adjustment in that regard too, because you're playing not only in a different environment, a hostile environment, and an environment that you're not used to, but just a different game, and that's where some of these question marks I think come from. In terms of the receiving core, I think they're primed for a better game. I think they know that. Overall, it wasn't as much of a disaster last weekend as it could have been. The offense coming alive late is, sure beats the hell out of not happening at all. And I think that's some silver lining there too. I'm interested to see what happens in this game. 10 years ago, this would have been the kind of, you put those teams in Camp Randall 10 years ago, and I don't know that Wisconsin wins, but it's definitely a close splitting hairs type.
Yeah, that's a heck of a football game, especially just the style of ball that were being played at those two buildings back at that time.
A lot of interceptions from the Alabama side. that the offense was dynamic enough to work around, which maybe that's the case this year.
Yeah.
If the Wisconsin defense takes a step up or two, we might see that play out in real time. I'm not that I guess inspired is a decent word by this Wisconsin team. South Dakota respected them, one of the best in the FCS. Western Michigan, they've had good years, but neither of those is at an echelon that you would expect to even be competitive with a team that has some of the most notoriety and one of the top two premier, conferences in college football. And as brutal as that sounds, that's just the way it is. Good on those teams for punching above their weight, way above their weight. But on the other hand, it's not a good look for Wisconsin.
No, it's really not. And I think right now, if you have to put Wisconsin in maybe SEC terms, for the current standing of things, I think for a long time, I think Mississippi State would maybe be a fair comparison, wherein for a long time, they had pretty good teams or, they were kind of at the top part of the middle of the conference. They're playing competitive football, but here recently, it seems like they're just kind of one of the bottom feeders of the conference, just with a better brand than Vanderbilt. And so I don't think that this really, at the end of the season, is going to be talked about as a marquee Power Four out of conference matchup. The way it looked on the schedule when we saw it, and the way it maybe looks to some people right now. I think you're going to feel the same way about it that you felt about that neutral site opener against Louisville, however many years ago. You go in and it just ends up being a bloodbath and a blowout, and everybody kind of writes it off by the end of the season and say, "Oh, well, Alabama doesn't play anybody,"
Man, Louisville, that was a trip. Bobby Petrino's second stint at Louisville. I always forget that it even happened. And if it weren't
What's
for
that?
Lamar, I think most people would have forgotten that it happened. And this was post Lamar for those who don't remember.
It was
Fun
like the
time.
year after he got drafted, right?
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
52-6 or something
That
stupid like
may be
that.
exactly what it was. It
Yeah.
was very ugly. Tua's first start. Lots of narratives going on in that game. None of them were the game will be competitive, and it was not. Uh, this environment, I think there's a lot of excitement about traveling to this environment from the
Yeah.
Alabama fan base. I know a couple of people who are going. I would go myself if I didn't have school. But such is life at my age. I guess not your age, based on our text thread earlier. But should be
That was a gut punch.
a really good
No,
atmosphere.
that felt bad. Really good atmosphere.
I'm thinking so. I mean, but I worry from the standpoint of that may be the only thing that's spoken about after this game is done. I've just I don't know. I know I mean it's kind of a doom and gloom vibe right now, but when you're going down to the wire with an FCS team in the Big Ten, that's what it tends to evoke. I can't do anything about that. Uh, Certainly some of that from the Alabama game against South Florida. I think more people are willing to write that one off because maybe
Yeah, because the end of game explosion did happen.
or maybe that team and that coach just has Alabama's number. Either way, sort of thing happens in sports.
Yeah.
2 weeks in a row with Wisconsin, two different teams. And I mean, I don't think that the North Dakota State team that shows up to play Colorado would have lost that game last week between Wisconsin and South Dakota. I really don't. I
No.
mean, and that's notwithstanding the fact that they probably should have won the Colorado game, but
Right. And I also would say that, like, I think honestly, South Dakota plays USF. South Dakota plays you know, somebody. I think South Dakota is capable at some point in the season of actually beating Wisconsin in that game. Is really what I'm trying to get at here. These teams play 4 or 5 weeks later in the season when they're both. South Dakota's kind of maybe hitting their stride a little more. Maybe Wisconsin is too, but it. I didn't think the talent level of the players on the field was the difference in that game. Thought team cohesiveness and coaching was the difference in that game. So all that to say, again, same thing we've been saying. This is probably gonna be pretty bad.
Well, let's analyze from the other perspective. Let's bring some Alabama stuff into the fold. I mean, looking at last week, looking at what we've seen past 2 weeks so far, lots of talk about the offensive line and the alignment that had to
Yeah.
shift last week because of injuries and all the things that happened. Mostly with Caden Proctor being out and Elijah Pritchett not playing until the fourth quarter, which he was a game changer, and Wilkin Formby deciding that it was appropriate and good for him and his experience and his growth and progression in college to get all the penalties out of his system in the same game. Which, if you're the coaching staff, you hope that's exactly what it was and nothing more.
Yeah, he's already hit quota.
What are the areas this team could shore up on?
I mean, I think that one of the ways that Wisconsin could maybe take advantage of Alabama a little bit is, how long do receivers have to get open? I am a little bit worried about guys staying locked up in coverage. Our defense, our DBs being able to continue covering receivers downfield when Van Dyke rolls out the way he likes to. He's a pretty good, not necessarily scrambler, but move around in the pocket. We talk about young Russell Wilson, the way he was always moving about and running and doing that crazy stuff to keep his eyes downfield, not just take off and run the football. And Tyler Van Dyke does a little bit of the same stuff. So I think that that's somewhere that we can shore up is, just being able to keep contained for longer periods of time, or the pass rush needs to get home and actually keep Van Dyke contained in the pocket, not let him get outside.
This is a wild world of quarterbacks. The footage has been going around, but for those who don't know, Tyler Van Dyke has played against Alabama before, back when he was at Miami. They kind of got their own thing going on right now with Cam Ward and the Albany quarterback who transferred there just to sit behind a Heisman candidate. So that was a decision. But then
he's in Miami, brother. You've been to Albany in October?
No, I have not.
My mother has. I have not. It's not that great of it. You're not missing much.
And then you've got Wisconsin's quarterback at that time, Graham Mertz, over at Florida, about to lose his job. Strange times we're in. Point being, though, not entirely unfamiliar for coach or quarterback. We talked about that connection on the show before. I mean, is Tyler Van Dyke the guy that beats Alabama? I don't lean towards it. But then again, if you had told me that the quarterback that was going to beat Nick Saban as an unranked team at Alabama for the first time was Zach Calzada, I think I might have had to check out some things to ensure that I wasn't on some other planet. And
next week we'll discuss what those things would have been.
Yeah.
What's Will Miller's checklist for verifying that he's in his normal plane of reality?
We're never sure. It changes all the time. Really changes all the time at the college level, much like the transfer portal and all that stuff going on. But I also think, Wisconsin's going to be jacked for this game. That sort of thing plays a role. And it matters.
Maybe.
I mean, it matters. And if you're the coach, you don't have to get your team really keyed up for the game like you would against South Dakota, like you would against Western Michigan, which I don't think you should necessarily have a hard job getting your team ready for the season opener of all games. But I'm not a coach.
But sometimes it is what it is.
Right. Exactly. There are many reasons that I'm not a coach. And I guess I don't know the nuances that go into all that. But
I mean, look, I did it for 10 games, 11, 12, something like that. I don't know. And honestly, man, the best I could figure out is some days the kids showed up and they were flat. And there are factors like who you're playing that can play into that. There are also factors like the weather for the game that can play into that. There's factors like how many people show up. I mean, Wisconsin's not worried about
time, 11 a.m. Whoop-de-doo.
Yeah. Drag ass. No, they're not jacked for that game. Not unless they were out drinking on the quad with the rest of y'all before it. But no, that's certainly something that could be a factor is, crowd energy and team energy. But I don't know with the talent disparity that we think there might be between these two teams if that sustains any sort of elevated play for more than a handful of drives.
I wonder about that because I think, and I'm the type of person in all college sports that is going to give leeway a little bit to the atmosphere, to the home environment.
Yeah,
We
that's
say it all
fair.
the time. College basketball is the toughest sport to win on the road for a
Mhm.
reason. Most intimate environment. From a per capita standpoint, noise, all that going on. Um, and I have an appreciation for that. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in Knoxville. I've seen it in Auburn. I've seen it attempted in Starkville. Um,
They did give that a try.
the heart is in the effort, I guess. But how far does it really take you when the other team is just better?
And vastly, you know.
I've seen that happen. I don't think LSU was vastly better than Alabama in 2019, but they were better
Yeah,
and ended up winning the game. Was it, it wasn't obviously a blowout, final score 5-point differential, but
right.
I mean Alabama's playing catch up since the second quarter of that game.
Two was like 60-70% generously.
Yeah, on one leg, and he drops the football, uncontested on the 3-yard line on the first drive of the game. It was nuts. It was right in front of me.
Hey,
But I
Will, where were you
digress.
sitting?
My parents have season tickets in the north end zone, about
I,
row 20, and that's where we were. My mom and I sat in those. My dad sat in the ones in the upper deck,
there you go.
and the game was crazy. But point being, football more than anything. I've said this a lot, never on the show that I don't think, but football is the sport to me that it's least likely for somebody to beat anybody on any given day, um, versus
Okay.
basketball or baseball or softball. You know,
Because it's less of an emphasis on like one individual performance, one standout performance is less likely to get you over the hump.
that and it just takes so much out of you to play the game for
Yeah.
60 minutes to be running into each other full force. I mean, and that's what Wisconsin has thrived on, for such a long time, and they had a lot of great success. I feel like that brand of Wisconsin football is dead and buried when you talk about pounding the rock with guys like Monty Ball,
Yeah.
Melvin Gordon. I mean, Corey Clement, who was a bit more of a hybrid type of back, but Wisconsin, they've also, like, before Iowa was tight end. Wisconsin had some really good tight ends. I was thinking of guys like Troy Fumagalli. Um, they played it was like close quarter fighting almost. You're gonna hit each other and see which guy's mouth guard comes out.
Which
Uh,
which sort of makes you lament that we didn't have the 12-team playoff again 10-15 years ago like we're talking about because, that that's how Alabama was playing football back then too. That's how a lot of major powers were and, it's
Run the ball, run the damn ball.
run the ball and have JJ Watt on the front seven. You know?
And TJ Watt was a freak in college. I mean, people don't talk about his college career enough for what it was. He was
Yeah.
terrorizing folks when he was over there at Wisconsin. I just don't think people realize it. That
No, because he was at Wisconsin.
the Wisconsin team that beat LSU that year in Lambeau, which was a great game, ended up beating Western Michigan in the Cotton Bowl. A little trivia. It saddens me that we're now old enough to where there are kids today that are college football fans and have memories of college football that were not alive when that game happened, back in 2017. Um, that was when PJ Fleck was the Western Michigan coach and Corey Davis was the best wide receiver in college football.
It wasn't even 10 years ago.
No, it was
What are you
over
talking
seven.
about? Wasn't even 10 years ago.
It was seven.
2017.
It was over 7.5 though.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know, maybe
not an insignificant amount of time, but that team was good. That was a
Yeah.
really, really strong football team, and, they were playing in that game against Western Michigan. They were the number 8 ranked team, um, and they would have been in if all
Yeah.
else is held equal, and I don't think Western Michigan reached that high in the rankings. I think they were like 15, but they would have gotten a spot because they were the highest ranked Group of 5 conference champion. I want to say Temple was in second.
That'd be a fun project to take a look back at, like, say the
Mhm.
last 25, 30 years of college football. At the end of the season, at the end of the New Year's Six games, or not the New Year's Six games, but at the end of the conference championships, what would the playoff bracket have been in a 12-team format?
As Chris Peterson, Kellen Moore, Titus Young, Doug Martin, Jamar Taylor, so many great Boise State players just sob silently into their pillows. Um, I mean, they beat the brakes off Georgia and Atlanta and had nothing to show for it. Um,
Yeah.
that was the harsh reality of the sport back then, and it saddens me because um, everything that's changed since then wasn't done in service of teams like that. Of course, it was done to put more
But that's who we always wanted this stuff to be done in service of.
right.
As a fan base. None of us have ever given a damn how many stacks of cash ESPN can lay their head on at night. Or quite frankly, I'm sorry to say it, Bama fans, or that Greg Byrne and the university can, for that matter. But what we create, we wanted to see teams like UCF get into the playoff. We wanted to see teams like the Cincinnati team the year before they got into the playoff go to the college
And
football
that
playoff.
team might have won a first round game.
It really might have. That was the one everyone wanted to see. It almost felt to me like they got in to play Bama because we had to have a makeup for leaving them out the year before, and it was everything that was going on.
Well, it was more that Cincinnati had the wins. They played Notre Dame and they won that year, which is
Yeah,
probably one of the most forgotten games I can think of.
because so many people have done that to Notre Dame since.
When you talk about UCF, for example, and the run of dominance that UCF went on before Cincinnati,
Yep.
they didn't have anything like that on their ledger. That Cincinnati team in 2020, they got like 3 ranked wins.
Yeah.
And they took Georgia down to the wire. Another fantastic ball game. Even though the Group of 5 team lost, probably my first personal favorite of the Group of 5 New Year's Six bowl games, other than UCF beating Auburn in the Peach Bowl, just because of how competitive it was, and it felt like these two teams of equal
You
stature.
don't.
Is wild to say, but it felt that way, and the game played out that way. And then the next year, obviously didn't happen the same, but they got in, and I think that was the moment Luke Fickell probably realized, as much as he wanted to wait for Ohio State, and I mean, it's a crazy discussion every year saying Ryan Day will be fired. I think it's always ridiculous, but nevertheless, it's a discussion. But I feel like at that point in time, he had done what he could do with Cincinnati.
Yeah,
After
but
all
now
stuff that happened, with Tommy Tuberville and all that afterwards. And I mean, he brought that program all the way up. And before the 12-team playoff, there was nowhere else to go.
no, but you do have to wonder now. Okay, yeah, everybody gets why you made that decision to leave Cincinnati, but when you go to do the next thing after Wisconsin, which you're going to do, let's not look. Sure, in theory, he could have a 20-year run at Wisconsin and be have busts in alumni halls, for all of eternity. But that's probably not going to happen. There's going to be a next stop. Maybe it is Ohio State, because I'm one of those people. Will I don't think anybody's done less with more in college football than Ryan Damn Day. All right, he's a bad football coach, and he shouldn't have that job. And they need to get rid of him. So let's say he does go to Ohio State. Well, now that you're going to get this, you're applying for this job with Ohio State. The last thing on your resume isn't Cincinnati, it's Wisconsin. It's what you've done in the meantime. So what are you doing with this new opportunity with theoretical access to better talent, more money, better facilities, all of these things? And like we started the show talking about, quite frankly, he's turning up a bit of a goose egg so far.
Well, last year was not a good year.
And you want to give him the first year pass, but
I mean, I don't really. As time goes on, I believe in that less and less. Um, I look at the
maybe in
first year.
today's game.
I look at the first year Lincoln Riley had. I look at the first year Brian Kelly had, was excellent, going to the SEC title game, beating Alabama in Baton Rouge. I mean, Josh Heupel's first year unaffected by COVID. Look what happened. I mean, Hendon Hooker doesn't get hurt. You might have a Heisman in Knoxville. And I mean, I think in today's game, with just how good these teams are, underachieving is what it is, and there are certain programs that just aren't going to tolerate it for any length of time. Some coaches can see it coming. I look at Gary Anderson, who's a defensive whiz and a guy that I like a lot, who bolted Wisconsin when, again, I think he realized, he was the coach of that team 10 years ago. I think he probably realized, this is what I have to offer this job. They have a different vision.
Yeah.
And I mean,
that's the ugly secret that you're kind of hinting at right there, is that we don't like to acknowledge this, but there are universities and their athletic departments and ads that are perfectly content sitting somewhere between 8-4 and 10-2 every year and making a little bit of money and getting their TV check at the end of the season and giving everybody a good student experience. There's some places that are perfectly, they don't care to give you the resources to compete for a national championship. Even if they have access to them, they don't care and give them to you.
And that's part of coaches these days. When Mike Norvell got his extension at Florida State, that came with more of a commitment to facilities, more of a commitment to the assistant pool, which has become another sticking point in some of these areas. And as it should be, you want to build the best staff around you so that all the elements can be as successful as possible, so that you're getting everything possible out of the roster and staff that you're building. I mean, that seems linear at this point.
And also, just to touch on that, assistant pool of money real quick. Also, because something we need to talk about more, it's absolutely ludicrous that, we're paying these coaches, head coaches, $6, $7, $8 million. And the analysts that are doing a lot of their grunt work for them, doing a lot of the heavy lifting for these teams, are making less than the average smoothie king worker. $30,000 a year, something like that. That's crazy. There needs to be more money put towards
At that point, I'd just go be an analyst in the NFL for $125,000 a year if it was possible. I know it may not. It's not just as cut and dried as being like, "Hey, I want to go do this."
Only 32 of those teams.
That is true, and they have all the resources in the world. Most of them, well, maybe not, or at least they do. Some of them don't use them. Jacksonville, but
Cincinnati until 4 years ago.
Yep, that's a good assessment. Kansas City 15 years ago wasn't doing.
Kansas City right the hell now. They got voted. They've been voted multiple times as having some pretty bad facilities by players on the team, and this pissing match there with the city of Kansas City over the stadium.
Bring back the Dallas Texans. That's all I'll say. Be funny.
I've heard of worse ideas, and that might actually, if the Kansas City Chiefs today, right now, after a three-peat in the Super Bowl this year, if they did that, said, all right, we're following through. To hell with it. We're going back to Dallas, where the Cowboys haven't won anything for 30 years.
I think Jerry might stroke out.
Well, what happens to the Cowboys? What happens
Jerry
to
might
Cowboys
stroke out.
Well, Jerry might die. Jerry might die if that happened. All right. On that bombshell, that if the Kansas City Chiefs move back to the city of Dallas, Texas, over a pissing match over the stadium, Jerry Jones might die. That's the final conclusion we leave you with on Behind the Glass Sports this evening. Just kidding, Will. I think we've got some score predictions to get in here.
Yeah. All right. So we got Alabama, Wisconsin this Saturday at 11 a.m. If you're just happening to join us just now in these last seconds of the show, give you a little bit of this content. I'm seeing this Wisconsin team scoring under 20 points. Let's put it at a good, comfortable football number of 17 instead of
Okay.
16 by USF last week. Alabama, oh man, 41. So we'll take the one from the 42 last week and give it to Wisconsin for the 17, and it'll be 41-17 for my prediction.
All right. I'm going to rub you the wrong way with my score for Wisconsin. Think they're going to kick 5 field goals. Think they're going to score 15. It's not a football number, so I'm hoping that bothers you a little bit when you go to bed tonight. But I do think the offense is probably going to torch their secondary for most of the day. And quite frankly, no, I don't think that Kalen DeBoer is going to be all that inclined to just run the football starting in the late second quarter, because some of these pass protection packages need to be worked on with this offensive line. If it gets out of hand, it'll be a bit of a scrimmage. So yeah, 56-15. They're going to keep passing the ball until the fourth quarter. Then they'll start running the clock out. And quite frankly, we've got Ryan Williams. All right, y'all. That's Behind the Glass Sports this week. Next week, hopefully, we'll have Hardy Graham back. And but moving forward, Will, I think that this is what we're going to be doing Thursday nights, 5:30 to 6:30. Tonight it's just Will and I, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up now, half hour early. Go ahead and get you to the Thursday night. Oh my God, we didn't talk about Thursday night football at all. There's a football game being played in an hour. We didn't talk about it.